Sorry, just making some adjustments. I am now so very pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Beverly Jacobs. Dr. Beverly Jacobs was recently appointed to serve as Senior Advisor to the President on Indigenous Relations and Outreach at the University of Windsor. She also practices law part-time in her home community of Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Beverly was appointed to be the Indigenous Human Rights Monitor with the Mohawk Institute Residential School Survivors Secretariat, which was established in 2021 to organize and support efforts to uncover, document, and share the truth about what happened at the Mohawk Institute during its 136 years of operation. Beverly is also a consultant, researcher, writer, and public speaker, with her work centering around ending gendered colonial violence against Indigenous peoples and restoring Indigenous laws, beliefs, values, and traditions. She is a prolific scholar, and her published work has earned her numerous awards. You can read more about her impressive accomplishments on our speakers page. Dr. Jacobs is joining us today to speak about how the early feminists learned from the Haudenosaunee women about inherent equity or equality that was a paramount to Haudenosaunee way of life. She will present the women's national or nomination wampum belt to demonstrate the strength and roles and responsibilities of Haudenosaunee women. You will learn about the impacts of colonialism, patriarchy, and the resiliency of the Haudenosaunee women. Please note that we will have a little time at the end for asking questions and invite you to share any questions during and after the presentation in the Q&A section beside the chat section on the right side of this video. Welcome, Beverly.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll introduce myself in my language first before I get started. Scanos Gwego, Giaso Gowenkuse, Ganyangehaga, Nyagwai Shouta, Haudenosaunee. What I said was greetings of peace to you. And I told you that my nation is the Mohawk Nation, and I'm Bear Clan, which is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I also told you my real name, and my real name is Gowenkuse, and that means she's visiting. So my name is, I've had to learn what my name means as I'm growing up, as I did receive my name when I was a child. Through our ceremonies, our naming ceremonies in our longhouse. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak as your keynote this morning. I'm very happy to be back working with EVA BC a few years ago now. Was a really amazing experience, and I just wanted to acknowledge that before I get started. I wish I was there in person so I could give you all big hugs. Okay, so I do have a PowerPoint, so I want to share that with you as I'm going through. Hopefully this works. So I am presenting about really about my roots, where I come from, being a Haudenosaunee woman, a Mohawk woman, Mohawk, one of our nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I was raised very traditionally in my community, meaning that I learned from our elders and our knowledge holders, and my parents really worked hard to make sure that I attended ceremony, and so that was a big part of my life growing up and learning. And so I didn't realize how much I was taught really until I went to law school. And that's when I realized the impacts of also of colonialism and genocide of Canadian legal policies. And so I wanted, just to share that background, because it's important to the work that I do today, and important to who I am and where I come from, and my commitment to my people, to Indigenous people, to my community, to the women, to my children, my grandchildren, because when which I'll talk a little bit about, that the impacts of colonization has had a real detrimental effect upon Indigenous women. And I'll be talking about Haudenosaunee women specifically. So also thank you for the intro and all of the hats that I wear, and the things that I'm doing today. And everything is related. Everything I do is all related to the same issue, and it's about empowering Indigenous women, empowering Indigenous people, our children, by understanding the history of our people, who we are, and also the history of colonialism and the violence that has been enforced upon our people through many different ways, and I'll be talking about that. So one of the things that I also like to address right away is how we're all connected to the natural world. And for us as Haudenosaunee people, we always begin our meetings with what's called the Thanksgiving address. And in the language, it's Haudenosaunee, and it means, literally means words that are spoken before all else. So these words are also recited usually by men, usually in ceremony, anytime that our people come together at meetings, at political meetings, at ceremony, anytime we come together as a people, because what it does is it grounds us. It acknowledges who we are as human beings to the natural world, and always giving thanks, and that it is about a reciprocal relationship with the natural world, and that the natural world can continue on without us as human beings. And so it really is also a way of, when we gather together, a way of us to come together, and we say we come together as one mind, and that it also acknowledges the everything that we do in our work, in our homes, and when we come together in a group like this, it helps us to stay focused. It helps us to remind us of the reasons why we come together. And so really it's giving thanks to our Mother the Earth, and it's a greeting to her, to the waters, to all of the waters, to the fish life, to the food plants, to like the beans and berries and grains, greens, things that grow on Mother Earth, all of our medicines, herbs, everything that helps us to be healthy, to animals, the trees, the birds, the winds, the thunders, the sun, our grandmother moon, the stars, and our teachers. So we always acknowledge also our ancestors who help us in this lifetime. We acknowledge also them. So we're always giving thanks, and it's also a reminder that we as human beings are just one part of the natural world. And actually, when this is recited in community and our ceremonies and our longhouse ceremonies, sometimes it can take 10 minutes, sometimes it can take an hour, depending on the speaker and depending on how detailed that they want to give thanks about all of those that I've talked about in this very short version of the Thanksgiving address. And you can see at the end also of the Thanksgiving address is about love. It's about kindness. That's what our law is. Who we are as a people is about that emotional connection as well. So our laws, our ways of being are very emotional and also very feminine. And I'll reference that as well in this presentation today. And at the end of the Thanksgiving address, the speaker always says, "And now our minds are one." So it's almost like, when you see cartoons or even comic books where you have the bubble with all of the words, it's like there's one big bubble and all the minds are all in the same bubble. So that's what that means when we come together like this and recognition of who we are and that, as we're coming together, our minds are at one. So when I said that our ways of being as Haudenosaunee people are very feminine. So what I'm going to present to you is what I know, the knowledge that I've been told about our ways of being, about who we are as Haudenosaunee people, and our oral history. So this is, what was taught to me, through the generations, and it's always passed down from generation to generation. And so this is, also very, the way that I explain it is, a lot of our ways of being are done in the language. And so even that translation into English sometimes loses its meaning. And so it's just a reminder as I'm presenting that that's how I am able to present it through that knowledge that I've been told through the English language. And so this is the best way that I'm able to present it to you. So all of us as Indigenous peoples, depending on where we're situated in what we call Turtle Island, is our relationship to the land. So many of you now call it a land acknowledgement. For us, it's the direct relationship that we have to our land and territories through our creation stories. And for us as Haudenosaunee people, our creation story begins in the sky world. So we believe that, in the sky world, it's a spiritual place, and that there are spiritual beings that live and are within that realm of understanding. And that our creation story starts with a woman, a pregnant woman who falls through a hole in a sky world. And as she's falling, all she can see is water. And so as she's falling from the sky world, our people believe that animals can talk to each other, and that that we're talking to each other, because they could see this being falling from the sky. And so they all had to figure out how to help her. So it was the birds that came to help her, and helped her fall and saving her. And it was the turtle that was in the water, and all of the water animals then talked to each other and were trying to sort out how they were going to help her survive. So the birds brought her onto the turtle's back. And as she was landing on the turtle's back, they knew that being a human, a spiritual being, they needed to sort out how she was going to survive. So there were water animals that dove down to the bottom of the water where there was earth. And they brought up, and it was an otter that brought up the dirt, the smallest water animal, that went down to the bottom and started bringing up earth, dirt, soil onto the turtle's back. And that's where we talk about Sky Woman's her journey on the turtle's back, and created Turtle Island. And so you can see that also in her hand she had medicine. So as she was falling and from the sky world, she grabbed these medicines, and the medicines she planted on the turtle's back, and the medicines were tobacco, corn, and strawberries. So those are like our first medicines. And even in the Thanksgiving address, it talks about giving thanks because they're the leaders of our medicines. And so, there's also a recognition of her as she's planting, that she shuffles, and she shuffles with our mother, with the earth. And so even in our ceremonies, when the women's songs are sung, it's called a women's shuffle dance. It goes directly to the connection to Sky Woman and her shuffling at that time. And it's an acknowledgement. The men sing, and the men acknowledge the role of women and the respect towards women, especially because of her role in carrying life, and the respect that they have for women bringing that spiritual being into this physical world. So that was also because she was pregnant. She actually gave birth to a girl, and she gave birth to twins later. And that it was also part of the teachings about their role as grandmother and mother, and the relationship to Mother Earth. So there's a lot of the creation story even itself in the recital. I'm just giving you a little tiny bit of that understanding, because I wanted to acknowledge the femininity of our ways of being, starting with Sky Woman. And then this is another depiction, I guess, of Sky Woman landing on the turtle's back, and the acknowledgement of the strength of our women. And actually the artist and the previous artwork is done by my uncle, Arnold, who is now one of our traditional leaders, one of our chiefs. Chief isn't the right word, but one of the male leaders in our traditional council. And I've always said that our artists are and their art are also sources of our law, because they're able to also depict our ways of knowing and visualizing it in their artwork. And it's also a way for us to remember and to acknowledge and give thanks to our ancestors in this kind of presentation, to be able to show that. So again, just wanting to acknowledge the role of Sky Woman in our creation story. And another, what we call source, I call source of our law, is what we call the Great Law of Peace. And so in our territories, I think I might have, I'm just going to move forward here. In our territories, we have, this is where our lands and our territories originate from. So the Mohawk on the eastern side of our territory, and then Seneca on the western side. And the nations in between being Oneida, Onondaga, and Cayuga. So this is our traditional territory. And at that time, before the peacemaker came into our territory, so we're talking at least 500 years even before colonization, that this had occurred, because at one time we were all at war with each other, and we weren't well. And it was also a time that we knew that women were being violated, and our elders and our children. So part of the message of the peacemaker was messages of Creator. So our Creator delivered these messages to the spiritual being, who we called the peacemaker. And his journey through our territories was a tough one. If you can think of, war and being at war with each other, how difficult that would be for a spiritual person to come in to unite and to establish peace. So that was his role, and that was his spiritual role. And this is again is another piece of art by one of our knowledge holders. His name is Orrin Lyons, and so showing what he needed to do was to prove himself. He had to prove to the people that his messages are real, and that he was a very spiritual being, and that he came into our territories on a stone canoe. So when you think about that, if it's stone, it's not supposed to float. So so that was one of the ways that he had to show and demonstrate that his messages were real. And so one of the first messages that again, this is a really tiny piece, part of the recital of the Great Law of Peace, because usually it takes between 7 to 10 days to actually recite the Great Law and to translate it into English today. And so this again is just a one small part of my presentation to demonstrate the femininity of our laws. Because what had happened was that one of the messages of the Creator was that he had to meet with a woman first. And so he traveled through our territories. And again, I'll go within our territories, and where Onondaga, the center around Syracuse, New York, is also Rochester, New York, and that's where this woman lived. Her name was Jigosasa, and that was one of the messages of Creator, was that he had to visit a woman first, and to talk about the role of women in creating peace, and to establish peace within our nations. So this is what I want to share with you is the women's nomination belt. I'm not sure if you can see me because I can only see my PowerPoint screen, but I have a replica of the women's nomination belt. So we used wampum in all of our treaties and our wampum belts to understand our oral history. And I always, again, acknowledge how brilliant our ancestors were to be visionaries, to be artists, because these are pieces of art as well. Just to be able to design wampum belts. So we have hundreds of wampum belts that we have used either with treaty with other peoples, or remembering our traditions, our stories, our everything about who we are, and this being one of them. And so the women's nomination belt, so this is really the story of the peacemakers journey with Jigosasa. And so basically what she was doing in living in this place in Rochester was like, it was along the warrior's path. So again, being at war with each other and warriors coming through, she opened her home for them, and she fed them. But she also had listened to their war stories and fed off of them, and listened to them. But when the peacemaker came and said, yes, it is about nurturing and women's reflections on their role and their responsibilities, but also what he had said to her was that women have a role to play in establishing peace, and that there's an instinct that we have as women to be peacemakers, to ensure peace in our families, which is true because of how we raise our children and our families. And that as part of that responsibility that we have is to establish that relationship and what we call love, peace, unconditional love, and that there's a responsibility that we have to maintain that even through our language and teaching our children through our languages. And that her role as a woman is sacred to the land, and that we say that women are the caretakers of the land. Even the English translation doesn't capture the relationship of women to the land, but it's the same, the role of Mother Earth to give life, to maintain life. If we didn't have our, the things that Mother Earth provides for us as human beings, we wouldn't be alive today. It's the same as women's roles and responsibilities to give life, to maintain that nurturing, to maintain the relationships and healthy relationships, that unconditional love. And we say that women have an instinct that men don't have, and that because of that, we also understand that unconditional love and peace. and maintaining that. And so as a result, her role and responsibility to our families are as leaders. And so what the peacemaker had said was that women would be leaders of their clans and what we call clan mothers, and that they have a responsibility to the rest of her clan. And so that was Jigonsas's role in establishing peace throughout our territories, is recognizing the role of our women within establishing that peace within our clans. And she also had a role in naming our babies, naming children, and remembering them all. And it's still done today. So our clan mothers are still in existence today. Our traditional government is still in existence today. And the roles and responsibilities that they have exist today. But there has been a lot of impact. But I'm going to save that for just a little bit later in my presentation about the impacts. So that's what the belt and the line, the solid line in the belt represents the unity, the strength of women coming together, and the figures in the belt are representative of the clan mothers, of the leaders of our women. Then you can see in the center the outline of our longhouse. So that's what the longhouse look like traditionally, and that being the leaders of our homes, of our longhouses, that she took her role very seriously and very well respected and honored for her role as being a leader. But her role was also to establish a male leader, and in our language it's called Hoyana. And in the English, it's called chief, which doesn't even acknowledge or recognize the male leadership. And so a male leader also has the qualities of being a good man. So Hoyana actually in the language means good men, and that the characteristics that they have in being good men, that the mothers know. The clan mothers, like when you see boys playing, really you see who the leaders are, you see who the ones that are leading the others, but it's also about how their behavior, how their love and kindness and compassion are for the others, and making sure that the others are well. So that's the qualities of a good man. And so our clan mothers would watch that, and they would determine and appoint a male leader through her clan. And so that became her role and her responsibility in the establishment of the great law and the titles of both male and female, and that balance between male and female, and the roles and responsibilities that we have amongst each other. So, the development of that was to recognize and respect the role of our women and leadership. So there was already that inherent balance within our roles and responsibilities. But it also goes back also to creation, to the Thanksgiving address, and giving thanks to all of creation, that it's always about balance, always about the relationship that we have also with the natural world. And so that is part of who we are. And so that journey, we've never acknowledged, or we've never recognized linear time. So when we think about how long this would have taken to go through all of our territories, that it would have, it would have taken a long time. It would have taken a time for people to understand about peace, about love, about kindness, about compassion, but it was also about survival as a people. Like, we no longer wanted to be at war with each other. It was part of our understanding and knowledge about who we are. So this is another belt that we call the Hiawatha belt. And it's actually, when you relate it to the land, like, you could place this on a map, and it acknowledges the territory of our people. So the eastern door is the Mohawk Nation, and the western door is the Seneca Nation. And then in between is Oneida, Cayuga, and in the center was the Onondaga Nation. And this is where the formulation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of the 5 nations, and that in the center a tree of peace was planted in the Onondaga territory. And so it was a ceremony. It was an acknowledgement of the peaceful relations that we would have, and that the weapons of war were buried underneath the tree of peace. And that was, again, an acknowledgement not only of the physical weapons, but also spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, and getting rid of all of the negative, and the war and the violence that did occur at that time, and established peace. So that's 5 separate nations, and they each also have their own language that did establish this peaceful relationship, and establishing that unity and the strength of our nations within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And the influence of the Great Law is where the red, the larger circles. So the influence of the Great Law that occurred before colonization, that peace was starting to spread to other nations, and establishing those peaceful relationships amongst each other. So there was another belt that was created that was called the Dish with One Spoon, and really this is in the territory of what's now Southern Ontario, and our nations in New York State. We're all part of establishing this peaceful relations with other nations, and women were a major part of those treaties and negotiations with other nations, and the influence of our clan mothers and their role and responsibility to our nations. So again, it is really recognizing again the femininity of our laws. And so what I want to talk about now is kind of moving fast forward to colonization and the impacts of colonization. And so this is called the Two-Row Wampum Belt, or Guswenta in the language, which actually literally means river of life. And so this belt was my ancestors, the Haudenosaunee, and establishing nation-to-nation relationships with the colonizers. So this was done with the British, with the French, with the United States, and initial with the Dutch, and so we've traced it, the first with the Dutch in 1613, that this was initiated, this relationship. And so I'll share the meaning of it. So imagining this as a river of life, and that the purple line represents our canoe, everything that is held in our laws, in our way of being. So everything that just talked about our laws, our customs, our beliefs, our language, our ceremonies, our creation stories, everything that made us who we are was held in our canoe. And on the other line was the colonizer's ship, which held their laws, their customs, their beliefs, everything that made them who they are. And we always had what we call visionaries or seers. They could see in the future, they could see what was coming. So it was already known about this relationship that the colonizers were coming into our territories. And because our nations had already, indigenous nations before colonization, had processes and protocols of establishing peace, which was about the women's role and the women's responsibilities and roles of maintaining peace and being a major part of the peaceful relationships, that it was understood that same relationship would be with the colonizers. So there was at that time friendships made. So there's three actually principles of this relationship, one being peace, friendship, and trust. And so these were part of the principles of this healthy relationship that we were to have. So a nation to nation, sovereign to sovereign relationship, and that we wouldn't interfere in each other's way of life. We wouldn't interfere in, what we held and what the colonizers and what was held, and that we would live together with these principles in mind, because understanding the healthy relationships that we needed, and that we would live together on these lands and territories in this healthy way. And so that maintained for a while. And when it was established with the British, there was also what was called the covenant chain. And this is where the British took on this treaty protocol of nation to nation and began the numbered treaties across the country. And another treaty relationship was called the covenant chain. So the covenant chain was also British specific to this relationship and understanding our relationship to each other. And that the covenant chain also became a real symbol. So it became a silver chain. And that silver was used specifically because it didn't rust. And that as part of that relationship that we had, that, as we're moving along this river of life, that there would be times where the chain had to be repolished. It did tarnish, but part of the process was to polish the chain, repolish, to come back together, to acknowledge that relationship that we have. And so those peaceful relations were established. However, when we start talking about British colonial ways, I guess, is that they forgot about this original relationship and created law. So there was a law called the British North America Act of 1867. There was also a law underneath that because it established federal responsibilities. So Section 9124 of the British North America Act said that the federal government would take responsibility of Indians and lands reserved for Indians. So basically, us as Indigenous people were forced into this ship, and we became crown wards. We became wards of the crown. where all of a sudden they could control Indians in our lands. So with the initial establishment of that law, it violated this relationship immediately. It violated the relationship. It violated the principles of it. And it created a violent relationship, because then all of a sudden they defined who we are. They defined who we are as Indians under the Indian Act, and defining us as an Indian, which is totally not correct. The Indian Act being the most racist and sexist piece of legislation that exists in the world. There's nothing like it anywhere. And it was established and created under colonial principles of patriarchy, Victorian rule. And so that also is what came in their ship, is how women were treated. Women were treated as property, as not human, not having any rights or responsibilities other than, you know, what the men determined them to be. And so when the early colonizers came, and their wives, they came with them. And this is a story of Seneca, the Seneca Nation in Seneca territory, came into our territories as Haudenosaunee people, and the women came and saw the strength of that, what we had in our canoe, about women, you know, being the strength of being decision makers, being leaders. They saw, and actually in my research and the research that I've done, both in my master's in law and my PhD, is that they studied us. They studied our people. We've been studied to death. They studied about how our culture, was. And there's documentation. I found documents that said they could not, the early men, the male colonizers, could not understand how old ladies could govern a community. So there was no understanding of the role of our women in our communities as leaders. And so when they designed the Indian Act, they made sure that it was based on identification of an Indian through the men. And because we come from a matriarchal society, so I think one of the things I forgot to mention is that our identities are through our mothers. So through matrilineal society, is that we follow our mother's identity. So being my mother, so I say I'm Bear Clan Mohawk Nation, I'm following my mother and her mother and her mother's mother, and so on. I can trace it back for many generations. And so as part of, you know, the strength of that, and when the Indian Act was established and there was studies being done, there was, you know, this is when the racism came. This is when the lack of understanding of who we are. This was the beginning of residential schools. This was the targeted genocidal policies against our people. And it targeted our women first through this identity of the Indian Act. And it's also what I call the first phase of missing Indigenous women, because we lost a lot of women then. So basically what had happened was, under that first Indian Act, an identity through the men. So the men could marry whomever they wanted. They could marry white women, Asian women, Black women, white women, and they became a status Indian, right? So they became registered as a status Indian under the Indian Act. if a woman had decided to, whomever she married, she became registered under his nation, under his community. So she was forced then into his territory. And when I was talking about our relationship to our lands, we are forcefully displaced out of our own traditional lands and territories into his. And it also had, if she had decided to marry a non-status man, and I make that distinction as well. If she were to marry a white man, yep, she had no status, she had no understanding, she was not given any chance. She was forced into his and not have status, which basically meant, again, being forcefully displaced from her territory. And, that's, like I said, we lost a lot of women at that time. And when I say non-status, it also means that in our territories, the border went right through our people. So through colonial wars over land, this border was created right in the middle of our territory. And so if a Mohawk woman met a Mohawk man who lived on the US side, she lost her status as an Indian. She was forced again. I mean, she would have been in, I'm gonna look at the community of Haudenosaunee because that's the borders right through the Mohawk territory, is that she would be forced to live on the other side of the river, on the US side. And so that had another detrimental impact on the identity of our women and their children, because they were forced into the ship. So during that time, I was talking about the early colonizers and the women that had come. Those early feminists, right? They came into Seneca territory and saw how our women had all this leadership and what they called rights. We never called our ways rights. It was our way of life. It was who we are. So our ways of being did have an inspiration to those early feminists. And it was what they had called rights, that, I have a right to equality. I have a right to a voice. I have a right to who I am as women. And so that was the inspiration from Haudenosaunee women. And so those early feminists, Elizabeth, Katie, Stanton, and Gage, right? Those were the women who came with those colonizers and established that early feminist movement as a result of our women. So that's sometimes not taught, that understanding of where feminists came from. Again, there was a shift in language from responsibilities to rights. And I make that very clear actually in the research and the work that I've done in my master's, and recognition of Haudenosaunee influence amongst the early feminists. So another big part of understanding this, and actually this is going to be the cover of my book, bringing together my PhD and my master's in law dissertation, is the strength of our women and the spiritual aspect of our laws, and the spirit of our women, and the strength of our women and water. So in the center, you can see the circles. It's like the ripple in the water is what it's intended to be, in the spirit of who we are as a people. And our ceremonies also acknowledge the I guess, the femininity of our laws. So what we call the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, our planting ceremonies, our songs that are sung during that time acknowledges women. The women's seed songs are sung during that time. So it's like during the planting, before planting is actually getting the seeds ready. And it's acknowledging the role of women as seed. There's a song that's sung that actually says women are the seed, because we're directly connected to Creator and our mother, the earth, during the time that we give birth. And so that's acknowledging the spirits of our babies and the naming ceremonies, and our women naming, our clan mothers naming our babies through the mothers, again, through the matrilineal society. And always about balance, right? Also acknowledging the role of our men, the role of them as leaders as well, and the respect that's there. So there was that inherent balance, inherent respect amongst each other, and recognizing our clans and where they come from, and the medicines, and fire represents our spirit. So everything that's in, again, this is my uncle Arnold's art, and just captures our whole way of being, and recognition of our songs, our medicines, our ways of being. So I just wanted to share that. One of the struggles today, as a result of colonization and the lack of respect of Indigenous women, is now dealing with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And this is actually another part of my PhD dissertation, in acknowledging the impacts of resource development and the violence against women, and how our women are now found in the bottom of our waters, of rivers and oceans, and the lack of respect of our women during pregnancy. And this was a very powerful piece by a friend who is now passed. His name was Brad Bonaparte, and he passed. He was an iron worker, and he went to 9/11 and did the part of the cleanup in New York City, and ended up with cancer and passing away. But this message that he left about the impacts, and this was in the late 80s when he designed and created this piece of art, and already recognizing the pollution, the climate change, the impacts on our animals and water animals and the birds and the air, and the land. You can see the mountains, and it just captures everything about where we're at today, and how we need to move forward. And during my deep PhD is an interview with one of our knowledge holders. Her name is Gudgie Cook, which she coined the term that women are the first environment when we're carrying our babies, that we as women, in carrying that life and carrying them in our womb, that captures the water, and that our babies are part of who we are, and that we are their first environment, and that we have a responsibility to them, and the respect that we have to them during that time. So it's a very powerful piece that captures the impacts of colonization and where we're at today. But I also wanted to acknowledge the resiliency. I know that the impacts are horrific, and statistics are horrific. I can do a presentation about that as well for forever. But I wanted to leave the presentation and talking about the resiliency of our women and our culture. So Gudgie Cook, that's her in the forefront there. She was a teacher, and there's a ceremony that was returned, that our people revitalized, our women revitalized, was the rites of passage, because that's a time when, you know, when change in life and when, you know, relationships begin, and having a next generation is then returning back to the ceremony and the honor of our young people when they begin relationships. So the rites of passage ceremony is a powerful ceremony that acknowledges family, acknowledges the clan mothers and the male leadership. And so the girls and the boys go through the ceremony, their aunties and their moms and uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers, like the whole community is involved in this ceremony. But it also is done in the language, and the ceremony is done in the language, and the tasks that they are to do during that time is a lot of hard work. And so there's an acknowledgement of, you know, and respect that they have, not only for themselves, and they learn during that time also about healthy sexual relationships, about healthy relationships, because our laws are also about relationships and respectful ones. So that's what they're taught. And I wanted, you know, I did want to leave with a positive message that, you know, I think it's maybe 15 years now that this, maybe longer, maybe even 20 years, that this ceremony has been brought back, and recognition of the rites of passage, and teaching our young people about themselves and healthy relationships. So I want to end there, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. And you know, we always, part of our culture as well is thinking at least 7 generations ahead, so that how we make decisions in this lifetime and what decisions that we make in this lifetime is critical for future generations. And I do take that very seriously, and everything that I do, every decision that I make, is for the future and thinking, because I know my ancestors did that for me. And so thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today, and hopefully there's enough time for questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beverly Jacobs, for sharing that with us, from the beautiful visuals of Sky Woman and Peacemaker, and to the teachings and the history and all the strength, resiliency. I like to anchor the learnings that I have in words, because then it stays and lives in me stronger, and it's sparked when I think about it. And so the words that come up for me are strength, resiliency, culture, relationship, balance, mothers, and feminine leadership. And so thank you so much. It was really important for us to really give the time and space needed for you to share. And currently we are a little over time, so we're hoping that it is okay that if any questions have come in, that we here at EVA will send them on to you for you to give response, and we will get those back to the participants as a whole. Does that sound okay?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you so much. And I know that I will carry this keynote with me as I move forward. And yeah, thank you.
Good. Thank you.